One of these jobs got a man legally hanged and then publicly dissected by the same industry he used to supply. Stick around, because we're starting at the bottom of the list and working our way up to him, and every single fact here is documented and sourced. 7 real jobs from history, ranging from disgusting to actively lethal to eventually criminal. We're not ranking these on gut feeling. We're ranking them on how much they cost the people who did them. Their health, their sanity, or in one case, their life. Let's start with the one that, weirdly, paid pretty well. Number 7, the Gong farmer. Tudor England didn't have sewers. It had cesspits, deep holes under privies, and outhouses that filled up with human waste over months, sometimes years. And when a cesspit was finally full, someone had to physically climb down and shovel it out by hand. That someone was the Gong farmer, Gong being an Old English word for both the privy and its contents. The law required them to work only at night, roughly 9 p.m. to 5 in the morning, specifically so nobody in daylight had to see, hear, or smell what was being carted through the streets. At Hampton Court, under Elizabeth I, Gong farmers were actually paid well for the period 6 pence a day, a solid working wage. But the job description on record says the work was spent up to his knees, waist, even neck in human waste. They used shovels, buckets, and long wooden poles just to break up and stir the material enough to remove it. And if a latrine's wooden floor had rotted from years of moisture, the ground beneath a Gong farmer's feet could give way entirely. Ventilation in these pits was so poor that asphyxiation from the fumes was a real, recorded risk of the job. Good pay, genuinely brutal work. That one was disgusting, but survivable. The next one turned the worker's own body into the bait. Number 6, the leech collector. Victorian medicine was still deeply attached to bloodletting as a cure-all, which meant there was constant demand for medicinal leeches. So leech collectors would wade out into ponds and marshes, roll up their trousers, and simply stand there, using their own legs as the lure. Leeches would attach, feed for a while, and then get peeled off and dropped into clay pots for transport and resale. Those pots weren't exactly durable either. If one broke in transit, the collector was left dealing with a mess of live leeches on the spot. Do this for hours, every working day, and blood loss and skin infection weren't occupational hazards on some safety form somewhere. They were just what Tuesday felt like. Number 5, the Mercury hatters. You've heard the phrase mad as a hatter. It's not just a line from a children's book. For roughly 2 centuries, hat makers used a chemical called mercuric nitrate to turn animal pelts into felt, a technique reportedly brought into France by Huguenot refugees and initially kept as a closely guarded trade secret. Workers applied it by hand, then worked with steam in poorly ventilated rooms, breathing in mercury vapor day after day, year after year. Chronic mercury exposure causes a genuine, medically documented neurological condition: tremors, slurred speech, irritability, memory loss, personality change. It got so common among hat makers in Danbury, Connecticut, once nicknamed the Hat City of the World, that workers there had their own term for it: the Danbury Shakes. A 1,901 survey of over 1,000 hat workers found tremors present in a significant share of them. And mercury in hat making wasn't actually banned in the United States until World War II. So next time somebody jokes about being mad as a hatter, that was somebody's real, slow-motion nervous system damage for generations. Those first 3 jobs were miserable, but survivable if you were lucky. What comes next is where things stop being just unpleasant and start actually rewriting medicine and law, because people were dying in numbers too large to keep ignoring. Number 4, the match girls, and a disease called phossy jaw. At the Bryant and May match factory in London, workers, many of them teenage girls, handled white phosphorus to manufacture matches that would light easily. They weren't even given a separate space to eat their meals away from the chemical. The fumes caused a condition called phosphorus necrosis of the jaw, known on the factory floor simply as phossy jaw. It started with tooth pain and swollen gums. It progressed to abscesses in the jawbone itself, bone that, in advanced cases, would visibly glow greenish white in the dark. Company records covering the years 1882 to 1897 show a mortality rate of 19.15%. Among documented phossy jaw cases at that one factory, very close to 1 in every 5 people who got it. In July of 1888, after social reformer Annie Besant published an expose and the company retaliated by firing suspected whistleblowers, roughly 1,400 women and girls walked off the job. It became one of the most significant labor strikes in British history, and the company caved to nearly all of their demands within weeks, leading to the formation of the Union of Women Matchmakers. But here's the sobering part. The actual chemical that caused phossy jaw in the first place, white phosphorus, wasn't banned in England until 1910, 22 years after the strike that made the disease famous. Number 3, child chimney sweeps, and the discovery that changed how we understand cancer itself. Boys as young as 4 to 8 years old were sent up narrow brick chimneys, sometimes still warm from the fire, specifically because their small bodies could fit where adults couldn't. Many worked completely naked, and families often reused the same soot-covered blankets from the job as their own bedding, meaning repeated exposure never really stopped. In 1775, a London surgeon named Percival Pott noticed a disturbing pattern in his patients. Years after leaving the trade, an unusual number of former chimney sweeps were developing a specific, painful cancer on the scrotum, which the trade itself grimly nicknamed soot wart. Pott traced it directly back to prolonged childhood exposure to soot, and in doing so, he documented the first occupational cancer ever formally recognized in medical history, decades before anyone understood what a carcinogen even was. Pott's own written account describes these children as being bruised, burned, and almost suffocated while working. His report helped push Parliament to pass the Chimney Sweepers Act of 1788, setting the minimum working age at 8 years old. 8 as the legal minimum. And disturbingly, the practice of using small children, including in the United States, enslaved black children to climb chimneys, continued in some places for another century after that. Number 2, and this one's short on purpose, because it's the calm before the worst entry on this list, the resurrectionists. Medical schools in Britain needed a steady supply of human corpses to teach anatomy, but the legal supply never came close to meeting demand in 1826 alone. Over 700 medical students were competing for fewer than 600 legally available bodies. Into that gap stepped the resurrection men, individuals who would dig up freshly buried corpses under cover of night and sell them to anatomists, sometimes for 8 guineas or more per body, enough money that families started installing iron cages called mort safes over graves just to stop them. It was illegal. It was despised by the public. But it was technically still just a job filling a market gap the law hadn't quite figured out how to close. Until 2 men decided digging was too slow. Number 1, Edinburgh 1828. William Burke and William Hare worked out a faster way to get a body than waiting for someone to die and digging them up. They started making the bodies themselves. Over roughly 10 months, they murdered at least 16 people: the elderly, the intoxicated, the poor, people unlikely to be searched for if they went missing. Victims included a well-known local woman named Mary Patterson and a man known locally as Daft Jamie. Every body was sold to a respected Edinburgh anatomist named Robert Knox, who was, at the time, lecturing to roughly 5,000 students on an official yearly allotment of fewer than 25 legal cadavers, which tells you exactly why men like Burke and Hare had customers waiting. The scheme fell apart when their final victim's body was discovered under a bed before they could deliver it. Hare turned King's evidence against his partner in exchange for his own freedom and vanished from historical record entirely. Burke was tried, convicted, and hanged in January of 1829 in front of a crowd estimated at 25,000 people. And then, in a piece of grim irony nobody had to invent, his own body was handed over for public dissection by anatomists, the very profession he'd spent a year selling corpses to. His skeleton is still on display at the University of Edinburgh Medical School to this day. This single case is the direct reason Parliament passed the Anatomy Act of 1832, permanently changing how Britain legally sourced bodies for medical science. A supply and demand problem that became a job, that became a serial killing, that became a law, still shaping medical ethics 2 centuries later. That's the entire arc of worst job in history, in one story. All 7 of these are sourced and linked below. I genuinely rather you fact check me than just take my word for it. Which one of these would you have quit on day 1? Tell me in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.